Welcome to the CEC report. It's October 28th and I'm Robert Barwick. I'm joined again by Craig Isherwood. Welcome, Craig.
Thanks, Robbie.
Okay, we have three things to discuss today. Number one, the global economic crisis just got €1 trillion worse. Two, free trade and bailouts. The Australian government scrambles to save the empire. And three, report from CHOGM. Prince Philip gets face-to-face with the CEC. Again. Okay, so first, we want to have a serious discussion about what's happened overnight on the global economic front and also the context in which it's happening. If you've heard the news, the markets are ecstatic because the Eurozone ministers in Europe have agreed to a bailout package again for Greece and for Europe as a whole. Now, the content of the package, or the main factors are, they're going to expand the European Financial Stability Facility to €1 trillion, or by €1 trillion actually. Secondly, it's going to be what they call a haircut, a 50% haircut for the banks to whom Greece owes money. And that'll write down Greece's debt by about €140 billion or so. Now, when the Eurozone ministers, such as Nicolas Sarkozy, the President of France, staggered out of their meeting at 4 a.m. to announce they had this deal, the stock markets shot up around the world. Now, I should just say here, the Australian stock market had a mysterious glitch all day. And the glitch was fixed just as the announcement was made. And in the 2 hours it was able to trade, following this announcement, the Australian stock market went up 2%. That you have to wonder about that, but we won't go into that too much. Now, of course, when the markets shoot up like this, we have to remember that they're all-knowing, all-wise, so they would know, obviously, that this must be the right deal. That reaction virtually guarantees this deal will fail spectacularly. On the €1 trillion expansion of this bailout fund, it's important to note it doesn't require governments putting up extra cash, which none of them would have been able to do anyway. What it's based on is a scheme to leverage the existing fund into an extra €1 trillion of fluff. And they might as well come in next week to Australia and bet it on the Melbourne Cup, such is the nature of this scheme. So, Craig, I'd like you to comment on the situation in general, but also, just in case anyone's wondering about this haircut, because it seems like a good idea if the banks write off some of what they're owed. We would never oppose that. But people might assume it's sort of like a Glass-Steagall thing. But isn't the bottom line that this measure has been taken not to save the people or the economy of Greece, but to save the euro?
And the banks.
And the banks.
That's the bottom line. And when you look at this bailout, it's just for anyone that understands that the world is in the process of a financial and monetary disintegration because of the enormous amount of debt. $1 trillion isn't going to do a thing. All it's going to do is dupe more people into doing more of the same.
Well, and the mechanism is more of the same.
Well, it's more of the same.
Leverage is just debt.
Well, all basically this stability fund is doing is ensuring people to come in and buy the bonds of the same bankrupt governments that they've been doing that got them in the trouble in the first place. So there's no change here, but you have to ask the question, well, why is this taking place? This is not a Glass-Steagall by any means at all. I mean, they're not talking about reorganising the entire monetary and financial system, this bankrupt system, for the benefit of the development of the physical economies of the nations. They're simply, again, playing statistical measures to dupe the markets, which are panicky because they know the system's coming down.
Which are easily duped as well.
And very easily duped because, look, you've got people going there to try and make money because money has become the means by itself, right? That's why we're in this mess to start with. But you have to ask the question, what is the context within which this is happening?
Well, you put out a press release this week that laid that out very starkly.
Yeah, we're talking about the increase of global fascism, and particularly in this particular press release that I put out was on how Australia has been marching towards increased fascist controls, particularly starting in the Howard era, after and actually before 9/11, and then really ramping it up. And see, what's taking place in the last couple of weeks really is a key to understand the fact that this bailout is taking place in increasing global fascist austerity. When we say fascist, we mean fascist dictator type austerity measures. What we're seeing is this horrendous assassination of Colonel Gaddafi, where his corpse, his bloody body, has been splashed all over the media. Now that's not an accident, Robbie. That doesn't just happen by accident. This is a part of a deliberate ploy to warn many leading figures around the world that are actually moving to oppose this system of monetarism, that this is what's going to happen to you if you oppose the British monetary system. Now, it's quite well known. It's been reported in a number of media outlets. One of those was Le Carnet et Charny, which is I think a French publication, which came out and actually said in a headline on the 26th of October, Gaddafi condemned to death by Paris and Washington. And it goes on to say that Obama and Sarkozy did not want him alive, fearing that he would talk too much during a trial at the International Criminal Court. In fact, the evidence is that the NATO forces conspired such that Gaddafi knew that he thought he was safe. But when the 47 car long convoy left the area that he was, during the daytime at CERT, right, it was hit, first of all, by a US unmanned drone. Now this used a Hellfire missile and blew up the first 21 cars, killed 50 odd people. We haven't heard any about this in the general mainstream press. And you say, well, the fact is that what's coming out now is this wasn't a direct assassination against Gaddafi by Britain, by the United States, and by the other powers. Because look, if Gaddafi was to go into the International Criminal Court, the reality is he would start talking about all the fascist measures, the police state measures that the British and Obama and so forth have been getting up to.
Yeah, I mean that French publication puts a French spin on it, saying Paris and Washington, but
that's really London.
The bottom line is London and
Yeah.
Washington.
Well,
It's Tony Blair that courted Gaddafi publicly and behind the scenes for many years, and the British for decades before that.
Yeah. So this is taking place in the context also where you have this insane Barack Obama, who's mentally insane. In fact, I can only recommend that people go to the LaRouche PAC website, look at the damning material that Mr. LaRouche is bringing forward on Obama. The fact that he is clinically insane, worse than Nero. Now, Nero killed a lot of his close family, his close friends, his close advisors when they started to threaten his power. And what LaRouche says is that Obama has a greater kill power with the use of the modern weaponry than anything that we've seen that Nero could get his hands on, right? Now, what you're seeing is in the United States an increase in the fascist police state measures inside the US, particularly in the from the Cheney-Bush era. Because when 9/11 happened, as Mr. LaRouche said again, prior to that, about 9 months before, he said that there was going to be moves inside the United States to create a Reichstag fire event like in Germany, which consolidated Hitler's power, and that's what happened with 9/11. So Cheney and Bush began to bring into place various laws, various modes of operation. One of those things was called the unitary executive, whereby the president would act unilaterally. And
yeah. Can I just butt in? You know, for people who think that we're being harsh on Obama, if you put everything else aside and just, because everyone knows it's pretty well documented how bad Bush and Cheney were. So here's Obama, gets elected, and everyone in America and the world believes that is all over now. And instead of him ending that all, he has actually escalated it.
Well, if you remember, people might remember that he pledged to get rid of Guantanamo Bay, right? He pledged a whole lot of things. As soon as he got in there, or after a couple of months, the first thing he went and did was visit the Queen. and Mr. LaRouche has made some scathing remarks about this, which is absolutely true. It's that the British Crown, this British monetary system, Wall Street, has protected Obama in order to promote the empire, this monetarist empire that we've been talking about and have talked about in detail in a number of our last news citizens. So Obama is protected by Wall Street. The intention is to go for global fascism, and with these unmanned drones that he has now got, he intends to use those, as he has just done recently, against American citizens. And in the last 3 weeks, you've seen the murder of a 16-year-old American citizen who happened to be in, I think it was at Yemen at the time. He was killed, and a number of his other families were killed as they were attending a barbecue by an unmanned, by missiles launched by an unmanned drone.
Yeah, we're told, and the American public are told that ignore the fact they're American citizens. We call them terrorists, so that justifies it. But then everyone Hitler killed in his Night of the Long Knives in 1933 were told, the German people were told that they were enemies of the state as well.
And this is the pretext that was used after 9/11. In fact, there's a whole police state apparatus being set up in the United States under what's called the Department of Defense Joint Special Operations Command. And that's just grown like you wouldn't believe. At the moment, they have something like a force of 25,000 people, including an intelligence division alone of 3,000 people. It partners with the British SAS, which means that it's in lockstep with ASIO and our Australian security forces, because that's the way these things work.
They operate. This crowd operates most of the drones.
Yes, that's right. Interestingly enough, the way the law is, I don't know why it matters so much, but it's a civilian operation that runs the drones, actually mans them, fuels them, puts them up, flies them. But when it comes time to press the button, it's got to be a military person that kills the people. And this clearance comes top down from the National Security Council, which is the Obama administration. This is not just military figures acting on their own. This is under the direct guidance of Obama. And he's come out and made it very clear that he wants to be, and he has actually issued the orders to kill Americans, kill other people, anyone that he sees a threat to his system. Now, bear in mind, he's insane, clinically insane. He's a puppet of the British Empire. So what you're seeing is anyone that is being a threat to this current system, this bankrupt system is now getting bailed out by $1 trillion, is going to become a target.
Well, silly old John McCain even came out naming Putin as someone who should watch, President of Russia, or the current Prime Minister of Russia, as someone who should watch his back following the assassination of Gaddafi.
I got his quote actually here. He said,
I think dictators all over the world, including Bashar Assad, maybe even Mr. Putin, and maybe some Chinese, maybe all of them, may be a little bit more nervous because...
And who did McCain say that to?
He was saying that to the British Broadcasting Corporation. That's right. He was on an interview for that, right?
So, because for the clarity of the audience, I mean, when we talk about Obama's system, what we're meaning is the British system. And the bottom line is, what we're seeing in this crisis is you're seeing certain nations, namely Russia and China, but that becomes an example for others, resort to strong measures of national sovereignty to preserve the welfare of their people. Now, they're not necessarily doing it perfectly, but they're saying we are preserving our sovereignty first. And of course, the British system, and then what Europe represents, the Eurozone, is a system where all sovereignty has to be
eliminated,
specifically economically with free trade and deregulation, etc., but also politically. Eliminate sovereignty, because only once you eliminate the sovereignty of individual nations, then supranational financial institutions, political institutions reign. That is the British system.
Which is the idea of the one world government, remember, which is...
Exactly.
Yeah. And the thing to note here is that Putin and Medvedev, right, they actually represent Russian patriotic and nationalistic interests. They don't do the British bidding. They don't participate, or they're stuck in the system because it's a global system at the moment. But given a chance for Glass-Steagall coming initiated by the United States under a sane president, this British system will evaporate very quickly and we can move into a Glass-Steagall-led recovery. Now, the British know that. They know that they have to smash any opposition to the potential for this Glass-Steagall proposal. Hence, look at the Chinese, for example. I mean, I know that Chinese and the Russians have sort of promised to help try to stabilise the euro system, but see, they're caught up in this global system which is disintegrating, so they don't really have much of a choice in some senses until there is a decisive break for Glass-Steagall. So what we're talking about, and people can't compare what's happening with the euro and this bailout in the US, in Europe right now, with what we're proposing, what LaRouche is proposing with the global Glass-Steagall.
Can I just say one mark that to prove that it's not the same as Glass-Steagall is today, the very banks that took a haircut, a 50% haircut, in some cases shot up in their share price by 20% in one night. Mm-hmm. So this haircut isn't all that bad for them. Glass-Steagall would make their share price probably go the other way.
It'll put them out of business in many cases because they're empty shells. They've got so much speculative debt that under a Glass-Steagall, that would just be charged back to them, and to don't tax the people for this, don't charge the governments for this. That's your debt. That's not our debt. That's not the people's debt, and consequently they'll go bankrupt. This is what Mr. LaRouche is proposing for Wall Street. Give that debt back to them. Charge back the bailout. Don't
make them eat it.
Yeah, make them eat it if they want to. So I mean, this is the context, and people have to when they and I think our supporters who read EIR, that read the alert service, know this. They're somewhat a bit smarter than the average Joe out there.
Can you just hold up that EIR you've been referring to as well?
Yeah, this is a really
quality of information you get from EIR people.
Yeah, this is the picture of the drones, which
this
really
is the October 28 EIR.
They're evil-looking things. There's no eyes in them. There's nothing, and these things are being targeted specifically. I mean, there's now talk about using them against drug cartels and so forth in Mexico. I mean, there's nothing to stop an insane president who himself has said he will do anything. He doesn't care about whether he has congressional support. He actually said that in a speech in Las Vegas on the 25th of October.
But last month, when I addressed a joint session of Congress about our jobs crisis, I also said that I intend to do everything in my power to act on behalf of the American people with or without Congress. So I'm here to say to all of you, and to say to the people of Nevada and the people of Las Vegas, we can't wait for an increasingly dysfunctional Congress to do its job. Where they won't act, I will. So we're not going to wait for Congress. I've told my administration to keep looking every single day for actions we can take without Congress. Steps that can save consumers money, make government more efficient and responsive, and help heal the economy. And we're going to be announcing these executive actions on a regular basis.
He's basically saying, I am a dictator. This is the doctrine of the unitary executive. This is what Bush and Cheney put into place. This is completely unconstitutional. I mean, his war on Libya in the first place was unconstitutional. The killing of US citizens by the US military apparatus is completely unconstitutional. This guy can be impeached. It has to be impeached very quickly for the sake of the world. And again, Mr. LaRouche says, look, it wouldn't take much more of a step to end up into another world war, given the insanity of this particular president.
And given that British imperial strategy is always about, when we're threatened,
create wars.
Create a war. All right, well, that's a good way to go to our second subject, Craig, because Australia is playing a role in this right now. So free trade and bailouts. Australian government scrambles to save the empire. Now, what we've seen this week is that our Prime Minister, Julia Gillard, and our Deputy Prime Minister, Wayne Swan, both have taken to the world stage not to promote the interests of the people and nation of Australia, but in a desperate push to save the empire. So Wayne Swan went to London and Europe to do what? To pile on the pressure as an Australian finance minister, remember the world's greatest, on these Eurozone leaders, just as they're going into this very important meeting, to say, you know, I represent Australia, we're the world's best economy, you must agree to this bailout package. You got to listen to what the bankers are telling you. Right? If you want an economy like mine, do what Australia does. Let the bankers dictate. So that's what he did. Meanwhile, Julia Gillard made headlines the other day she made a pre-CHOGM announcement that Australia is going to lead the way in saving global free trade.
With our 23 million people?
Our 23 million people will save world free trade by allowing unlimited imports from the world's 50 poorest nations. And Gillard called upon all the other developed economies to do the same thing. And what she was saying is the Doha round of the World Trade Organization has collapsed, and it's been collapsed ever since the GFC erupted in 2008. And the Doha round is like the second major push for an increasingly globalized free trade agreement. They'd like a world of perfectly global free trade, which the world last saw when the East India Company ran the show. And so because that's collapsed, how are we going to resurrect it? Well, let's all engage in unilateral free trade initiatives, and we'll keep it going that way. So, Craig, what do either of these demands have to do with the welfare of Australia, or the world for that matter?
Nothing. I mean, this, as you say, the Doha round of trade has collapsed because what you're seeing is a natural tendency for more protectionist measures. Countries are saying, well, you know, we have a population.
And they're sovereign measures.
Sovereign measures. We have a population to feed. And that's the impulse. Now, it's being resisted, of course, because you've got an international global financial system that is promoting the need for more globalisation, more free trade. Right? This is a British policy. Go back to the slave trading times of the British East India Company. Go back to the opium trading of the British East India Company. Go back and look at the fact that the American Revolution was fought over these free trade policies. The very policies that Julia Gillard, Fabian Julia Gillard, is pushing are the very policies of the British Empire. And this is not, there's no extrapolation required, there's no exaggeration. If anyone understands their history, you'll see that this is the nature of the beast, this is the nature of the empire. So, I mean, it's a nice gesture to allow the world's 50th poorest nations to export their products to us. That's a good thing. We should do that under the basis of a fair trade arrangement, where we're actually, as a developed nation, supporting the development of those nations. And look, there are things that Australia doesn't have, strategic minerals and so forth, like molybdenum is one, for example, that we should have an agreements with nations that do have those sorts of minerals, but they're fair-based trading arrangements, government to government, head of state to head of state, and not allowing private companies to come in like the British system does to rake out all the profits. But just look at BHP, look at Rio Tinto, right? Look at the profits that those private British companies, and when I say private, the largest shareholding of those companies is privately owned. They're not, it's not publicly owned by the Australian people. Who gets the benefit? Not the Australian people, but individual private profiteers. So that's the model that Julia Gillard is pushing.
And Henry Carey made the same point you've made, Lincoln's economic advisor, that the free trade system is the system of putting the maximum number of middlemen between the ultimate producer and the ultimate consumer. Yeah. And so they can sort of siphon off the wealth in the system without having to produce absolutely anything.
Well, that's the nature of Britain. During the whole period of the British East India Company, it was basically a giant clearinghouse just for products that other countries were deployed to strategically produce, not for their own national interest, but for the interests of the British Empire. And this stuff is sickening. I mean, what's Wayne Swan got any responsibility for in Europe whatsoever? What he's doing is promoting free trade, promoting more of the same. It's insane.
But it does reflect how desperate they were to get this agreement up, because he went over there purely for the arm twisting value of and how can that be in the interest of Australia?
Well, I think another measure is that the Australian dollar's gone to 107, and that's, so why has it gone up? Because there's actually intrinsic weakness. For those who know what's going on in the system, they know that this is just a cover-up deal, so they're going to get in quick and make a quick buck. It's all about making quick bucks.
Well, hang on, that's gone up rather quickly. Maybe it is coming in for the Melbourne Cup.
Maybe. Maybe all those people are flying in for the Melbourne Cup, and then they're going to have a...
Maybe that's part of the leverage for the ESFS. It's
a big deal, this Melbourne Cup. They even got a public holiday for it.
All right, so in the time we've got left, we have a report from CHOGM. Prince Philip gets face-to-face with the CEC. It's finally happened. His royal virus has been confronted by the CEC at CHOGM, the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting in Perth. What happened was 4 CEC youth from our Melbourne office who were over there went to the University of Western Australia yesterday, and they were there when Prince Philip arrived to inspect or tour the physics department at the UWA. So the youth went to the entrance of that building with their banner that has an enormous banner that says the British Crown created green fascism, and a smiling picture of his royal virus and his wife. However, there's a pretty heavy-handed police presence in CHOGM at the moment. You know what CHOGM stands for?
Yeah.
Cops holidaying on government money.
Some people say chaps holiday on government.
Chaps, is it?
Chaps,
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
chaps, yeah, British.
I don't want to. Okay, chaps. Let's go with that one. So the police ordered the youth away. So what our youth did is they split up. 2 of them passed out literature. 2 of them, including Glenn, went to the road at the entrance of the university where the Prince's car would have to pass, and they were at a T intersection there. And when the Prince's car approached them, instead of continuing by, it stopped so that the Prince could read their banner. And it stopped for about 15 seconds, so he had a good look at it from about 7 or 10 metres away. When Glenn saw Prince Philip inside the car reading the banner and smirking, he held out the latest New Citizen and yelled out, "Hey, Prince Virus, take a paper." But by that time, they must have finished reading and they drove off.
Or maybe he'd already got one from their work in Canberra.
They might have. But Craig, can you confirm that since that run-in, Prince Philip has been heard demanding that the name CHOGM be changed to Shoot'em?
Well, anything for a name change, because I think the thing is so irrelevant in terms of actually doing anything. This is a PR exercise for the British Empire, now called the Commonwealth. And it brings together heads of states to say, look at us, this is what we are. But many people are saying, is this thing actually relevant today? Because there are, you've got the advanced countries, you've got the poor countries, but overarching that, you have this empire structure, this monetary structure.
Yeah, and there's a very important article in the latest paper that we've just produced, which is about John Ruskin, the intellectual author, if you will, of the modern empire. And it's Ruskin built up a following of people like Cecil Rhodes and the Round Table. And it was from his ideas that they decided that the empire had to change from being this British gunboats, East India Company, redcoat empire to the form that we now have it in the Commonwealth. And the interesting thing about the Commonwealth is this is an organisation ultimately that all these, about 1/3 of the world's nations belong to. The Queen, she's not the head of the Commonwealth by virtue of the fact she's the head of a number of the members. She is the head of she is the queen of an organisation. It's a bizarre thing, but the Commonwealth is her organisation. She's the queen of it. That's her title. Every member of the Commonwealth accepts her as the queen of the Commonwealth. This is the modern empire.
Yeah, and it hasn't changed in the nature of it. Whilst you have a monetarist system, an empire-based monetarist system that is not interested in the development of the sovereignty of the individual citizenry, but more in preserving and looting and reducing the populations involved in those member states. So,
now, Craig, just we're running out of time, but I just wanted you to comment on this. We touched on it last week. We've hit the Royals hard since 1994, really, in our publications, but absolutely smashed them in the last 4 or 5 years around the global warming fight. We are witnessing a full-blown propaganda tour with this Royal Tour. I think we haven't seen anything like this for the last half dozen times she's come. You get the sense they're doing PR to try and reclaim their reputation?
I think that's because the entire financial and monetary system is so fragile that you do have member states like China and Russia that are made moves to look for an alternative, that you do have an increasing number of people supporting. 48 members of the House of Representatives now support the Glass-Steagall Act. 200 different organisations, including large unions, now support the Glass-Steagall proposition of Mr. LaRouche's, which is of course modelled on what Franklin Roosevelt did. And when the empire the British, the Queen, starts to think about Franklin Roosevelt, who knew who the British were and had his arguments with their representative Churchill, even though they'd get to work together for a while during World War II. I mean, they knew each other. They were completely two hated species. You know, they hated what each represented. So what you have is this. The Queen is not much good for anything else at the moment other than a PR exercise and bringing out all the gullible Australians that believe that she is just, you know, a harmless head of state when she represents an enormous power base. And I always like to think of it in reverse, Robbie. Think about if the Queen actually and actively used her power to stop the desolation that's taking place in British colonial Africa, right? Think about if she actually went the opposite direction, how the world would be completely different. You say, well, why isn't that the case? Well, the intention is that there is no intention for development of these countries, that this is an oligarchy. She's part of an oligarchy, of which the idea of reducing the world's population and treating people like beasts, just like Zeus did to the human race in Greek mythology, that's the image that one has to have of the Queen.
The desolation of Africa is their policy.
That's exactly right. And look, you know, it was Cecil Rhodes, you know, John Ruskin's protege that, you know, created the colonial Africa that of modern periods. I mean, it was also subject to massive slave trades, you know, by the Dutch East India and British East India companies, which merged to become the British Empire.
All right, well, that's all we have time for today. We've probably gone a little bit over time. Let me end by encouraging everyone to have a look on our website for a report, a video report from CHOGM by Glenn Isherwood. It's a 4 or 5 minute report up there. And you'll get an on-the-ground sense of what's going on. We have a big presence there this whole week while the CHOGM meeting's going on, and we'll have more to report in the future. But it's pretty action-packed at the moment, so make sure you tune in next week for more developments.